This is the Leadership School podcast. From conflict resolution, boundaries, and customer service, we dive into what it takes to be an extraordinary leader. Anchor Podcast is the easiest way to make a podcast. Not only is it free, but it has everything you need, including creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. For me, in just a few minutes, I was able to go from an idea to a reality of having my podcast launched and out there. Anchor not only distributes your podcast for you on all platforms, but it has everything you need in one place. You can download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back to the Leadership School podcast. I am here with Dilip Ramachandran. Now, Dilip is an experienced product manager, author, and founder. He's currently writing a book about his experience in product management, and it's the book that he wished he had had when he first started out. He has opened himself to being a person of learning, and through his openness and willingness, his curiosity to really learn, he has developed extraordinary leadership skills. He's passing those skills along to us with a great excitement and energy. Please join me in welcoming Dilip Ramachandran to the Leadership School podcast. Dilip, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Oh, it's tonight for me. It's morning for you.
Yeah, it is. It's 7:30 a.m. for me in Sri Lanka here. Yeah.
Sri Lanka, yes. So I am with here Dilip Ramachandran. I am so grateful and honored to be talking with you and about leadership and hearing all these wonderful things you have to say. You have just been so fun to get to know. So what I want to start with is just maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned already that you're in Sri Lanka, but tell us about that. Tell us about yourself, and we'll just go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds great. And thank you so much for having me on and working with my strange schedule. So
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
It's been great to find, as two parents, the time that works for both of us. So this is it, apparently.
This is perfect.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you about myself. So as you know, I'm originally from Sri Lanka, and I came to the U.S. for my education. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I did my undergraduate in electrical engineering, and then I kind of joined the workforce in sort of like software analytics and basically the software field, right? And I kind of naturally navigated to product management because I love building products. I love solving problems, and there was sort of a fit between what I liked doing and what skills the craft needed. And so then I spent the next 15 years becoming, a seasoned product manager, and then naturally just becoming a product leader. And I went from companies of different sizes. I worked at Walmart.com, I worked at Experian, and then I also worked at a lot of startups. So I got to really learn how to build companies, how to build enterprise software products. And as you have with startups, I also made a lot of mistakes, having to learn things by myself. And as I have a ton of stories from that. So one thing I'll talk to you about today is, that journey took me to where I am today as an entrepreneur of a business and also as a writer of a book. I want to share some of those lessons of my career journey. Yeah.
Wonderful. It's so fun. I love this journey that you've been on, and you're very well educated. And every time I talk to somebody who's so well educated, I always feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, I'm a little intimidated, because you're just so smart. And right before this interview, I said, he's so smart to my husband, and he goes, you're smart too.
You're smart too.
I was
Yes.
like, yeah, okay. Okay, so you mentioned your book. So let me just take a second to tell us the title of your book, what it's about, what brought you to writing this, because it's such a cool story.
Yeah, the title of the book is called Gangster PM. And
PM stands for product management, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So the book it's a great leadership book, but I really want to focus it just to product management. And because I felt like I know a lot about it, and I feel like it's a book I wish I had 7 years ago. As I talked to you, about my 15-year journey, I made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of wrong turns. I learned from all of them, but I spent valuable time on that journey. And I actually thought about it a lot last year. And I was talking to someone on my team, and he said, hey, you have all these stories. You should write a book. And that's the moment I said, yeah, I should write a book.
Well, I love about that. You didn't like brush it off. You were just like, well, okay, I'll do it. And you did.
Yeah, and actually, he said, what kind of PM do you need to be successful? I said, hey, you got to do some gangster stuff because, nobody's going to tell you what to do and nobody's going to give you the path. And you got to figure it out. You got to be a gangster. And that's the title of the book. So in a funny way, like I probably put a lot less thought into like the idea of writing the book and the story of the book than I thought one would need to. But then, writing a book is tough, but I've spent a lot of time on that part of it, on being a good writer. I would say, Kyla, that the book really talks about this mindset shift. And it took me a long time to learn that. A lot of people think that to be a great leader, you just got to work really hard. You got to put your time in, and you will be rewarded with leadership. And I found the hard way that it doesn't work like that. I found the hard way that I was sitting around thinking, hey, I'm working hard. Why did that person get promoted? And it's funny because as I interviewed people, they said the same exact thing. They said, why did I get left behind? And it's not that you didn't get left behind. It's just that you didn't get the guidance to understand what you were missing. You didn't get the guidance to understand that you got to shift from being a mercenary that's purely metric driven to something a lot more. You need to be a missionary. You need to have an ownership mindset. And I kind of got there in a haphazard chance by way. But I think there's a lot of people out there who are smart and talented who, if they were given the right guidance, they could get there too. And I kind of talked to you the last time we chatted, like, it's also about the people you see at the top, right? And so when you don't see people at the top who don't look like you, then you kind of self-select and tell yourself, I can't do that, right? And so this book is also for them to say, hey, there's a path there. You don't have to look a certain way to get there. You can be a minority, you can be a woman, you can have a certain orientation, you can be a leader. So a lot of the book is around that, stories around that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so needed. And that's the whole point of this podcast too, is to really say like leadership is for anybody who's wanting that role and to give some of that guidance and advice from people like you who've gone through and had to really learn through hard lessons, some of these experiences and tools, these skills that you need in order to be a leader. So, tell us about how you have built that leadership muscle.
Yeah, it's. I think it helps provide the context of what it means to be a product manager. As a product manager, you right out of college when you get your first job, you need to be a leader. It's not that you only lead when you manage people or you only lead when you're a senior. You got to lead from ground zero. And the common saying we use in product management is, responsibility without authority. Nobody reports to you, but you have to influence the people you work with, or you can't get anything done. That's the nature of the role. So I started building the muscle just by, like I said before, making those mistakes, right? And I think if I think about all the mistakes and maybe the 2 or 3 biggest mistakes I learned from, the 3 qualities I say that I have probably learned over this time is, number 1, communicating like a boss. Being a leader in especially product management, and I think it applies to anywhere where you're a leader. You're working with people from different functions. They might be in sales, they might be in marketing, they might be in engineering. And your responsibility is making sure that they understand what you're talking about, right? Sometimes as an individual contributor or somebody who's really focused on your craft, you know your content so well. You've written it down and you've read it 300 times. You're like, you should understand this. I've talked about it 300 times to myself. Why don't you get it? And people are like, yo, I'm talking to you for the first time. And maybe the second time, but I got other things to work on, right? So remind me why this is important. Remind me why we should be working on that. And so it's having, and as you go, and I talk about the difference between leadership and senior leadership, right? And at senior leadership, you have to say the same message 50 times and say with the same level of energy. You can't get tired, right? Because that's the job, actually. The job is running a TED Talk in every meeting, right? The message has to be concise. The message has to care to everybody in the room, and you have to repeat it. And so there's a lot of things I learned about communicating, and I had some bad stories about it. I think one time, this is the time where I'm at a company called Reputation.com, and you know, at that time I was a director of products, mid-level to getting into senior level there, and I was responsible for a suite of products. And so all the directors would meet in a room every week, and we would talk about what we're doing. And really, it was kind of like a Game of Thrones kind of setup. The CEO would say, "Okay, today is your turn, and you're on the chopping block. So what did you work on?" And so we would kind of nominate each other and say, "Hey, I got hurt really bad last week, so you go this time." And so it was my turn, and I was on there, and I presented the work that I did, and I was really proud about the work that I did. I spent a lot of time working on it, and the CEO looked at it and he goes like, "You're the dumbest PM ever worked with. Take your computer and get out of here." And
wow.
I was embarrassed. I was humiliated, and I was like, "What happened?"
Yeah.
I think I'm working really hard. I think this product is awesome. I even gave proof points. I said, customers are saying this is what they want. This is what we're hearing. This is what the data is telling me. So everything I've been taught, like have a metrics mindset, lead with data, have conviction. I followed all those things. But why did I fail? It turns out that I didn't think about how to tell that story to the CEO, how to involve him in the journey, how to make him feel great. So a lot of the times, communication is so important because you need to understand what people want and what their incentives are. And that incentive alignment needs to be there. If you don't have that, and if you don't communicate with that in mind, you're going to fall flat like I did in that meeting.
And some of that's like what people value, because some people are seeing the world through their values, and things are different. So if someone's value is finances, they're going to be looking at that whole project from a financial standpoint, whereas maybe you're valuing it through client satisfaction. So you're going to be looking at it from a completely different standpoint. But if you want that client satisfaction, you're going to have to communicate that to the financial person so that they can get it and get on board in a way that they understand.
Exactly, Kyla. And I think it's exhausting, it's tiring, because you have to talk to each different person of all the things that they want. But that's the job of leadership, right?
Yeah. Wow. So you said you had 3 things. You started with communication.
Right.
What was the second thing?
The second one is actually, the best way to say it is like, it's the power of saying no. And it's super important. And I know in the most recent podcast, you talked to Amber Palmer about this, and she talked about, she's in this 1.5 hour meeting, and, it's almost like we have to learn. I don't know how we learn it, but we have to learn the permission to say like, hey, this is taking too long. We're not getting to the outcomes we want to get to. And we feel like it's impolite to say that. Let's just sit and let's just listen to each other or talk what we want to say. But that's just a very simple example of that I learned from somebody I worked with. And he was actually a finance leader. He would say, hey, I think this meeting's going nowhere. We're on a road to nowhere because we're just talking about stuff. And I don't know what the goal is. I don't think the agenda was set well. So why don't we stop? Why don't you, Mr. X, set the agenda, and why don't you, Miss Y, figure out how we're going to get there, and let's meet again. And it's okay. Don't get hurt, right? And that was like a big deal. And people are like, yeah, okay, we're excused. We can go. We can try again. Great.
That's so perfect. I think that is really key, especially right now when a lot of us are working remote, right? So you get on this Zoom meeting, you've scheduled your day, you're here, and you finally are able to connect. And so you feel like you have to get all that information in. But if it's not working, it's not working, and you need to stop and regroup. And a lot of times we just feel like we have to, since we're here, we have to do it anyways. That's a really smart person and a smart way to go, and courageous to be able to say, listen, we got to start over, because you feel like when you say that you've lost something. You feel like you've lost that meeting. You've lost the goal there. You failed. But that's not it. It's just you're making better use of what you have.
Exactly, Kyla. And this is why it's the responsibility of the leader, because people who are not at the same designation or not as senior as a leader are afraid to say, I think we got enough from this meeting. Can I go back and do my work? They're afraid to, because they feel like, what does it look like on me? And so they are never going to say that. So it has to be on the leader to say, I scheduled 15 minutes or 30 minutes for this meeting. and we've got it done in 15 minutes, or we didn't get anything done in 5 minutes, so let's stop and convene. And that's just a simple example that applies to the work you do. You might be working on a project, and you have to have the power to say no and say, this isn't working. There's something we got wrong about the assumptions or the goals, and I feel like we're on a road to nowhere here. Let's go back and revisit the goals, and it's okay. Let's fail, and let's fail soon.
Yes. Yeah. And give people the dignity to tell them truthfully, but not to shame through that. Where I'm not saying, oh, you're terrible. Like that one person did to you, said you're he said that you were the dumbest person in the room, which was just obviously not true. But he, to say that is giving a lot of shame to somebody, but to say in a situation, okay, like I want you to succeed and you to be better. So to do that, we're going to take a different direction, or we're going to start over or something like that. It's working together for the good of the team and the good of each other and the good of the leader too, to be that person who can say with dignity and respect, this isn't working.
Right. And sometimes, Kyla, it's about empowerment. Sometimes people show up to a meeting and they're like, oh, the boss told me to come, so I'm going to sit here and listen. But they don't know that they had to do something. And you could, through shame, tell them they missed something. Or you could just say like, hey, I'm going to give this baton to you. I'm going to empower you. And you can do it. I know you can do it. I trust you. I trust your judgment.
Oh my gosh. This is a ethereal example, right, that you just used. When you said, you're like looking at me in the camera here and you said, I trust you. I mean, I'm just interviewing you, but I feel like that's so empowering for me to hear, because I think, wow, I'm trusted. I'm going to go do the best thing that I can do right now. I'm going to work hard at this, and I'm going to feel good about it, be excited about it. Because if my boss trusts me, I'm not going to bring him crap. You know?
Or if my boss trusts me, then I now feel like there's still a professional relationship, but I can ask for help now, right? Because it's all out on the table. Right, that they are willing to invest in you. I think that's a big deal for people. It's a big deal for employees. Yeah.
Absolutely. And employees are looking to leaders for direction. And I think, employees are leaders too. I'm not saying that if you're an employee, you're not the leader, but when you're the boss or the manager in charge of a project or product, you are having to oversee things. But when you can have that person, I just lost my train of thought. But when someone knows that they can come to you and ask for help, that's a really big thing. But also when they're looking to you, that's where it was going. They're looking to you for direction. And if you don't say yes and no appropriately, people aren't going to get the direction that they need. If you're just always wishy-washy, people are going to feel wishy-washy. Well, what am I even doing here?
Right. Exactly, Kyla. I think you're touching on something that's really important. When you're new at a company and you want to impress your manager, or you want to impress, the team you work with, you kind of want to do a lot. And if your manager doesn't kind of guard your time, and when you're confused, when a lot of people are telling you, well, do this and do that and do that, and you go to your manager, and if they can't say no to things, then you're going to be in a situation where you're overwhelmed, and you're going to be doing okay at a lot of things, then great at a few things. And that kind of ties into the flip side of saying no. I think a lot of people will say, well, the people who say no, they're hard to work with. They say no all the time. But one thing I add on to that, Kyla, is that the no is the beginning of a conversation. We're saying no because there's a lack of information to say yes. So when you say no, you say, I'm going to say no because I don't understand why this is important. Help me understand that. Help me understand why you think it's more important than what I'm doing. And then it becomes a conversation. But so sometimes I think we say, no, that's it. I'm walking away. No, we shouldn't do it. And here's why. Tell me if I'm wrong. And that kind of language, follow through, is really important.
I've heard different versions of this, which is really fun. That actually, what Amy Lafko, I talked with her several episodes ago, and she was so well known for saying, help me understand, that she'd walk into a room and someone would say, well, help me understand. And they'd joke with her. But then I've also heard of people who would say, paint done for me. Tell me what this looks like at the end. Or to say, convince me. Show me why this is important, why you came to this conclusion and decision, or just tell me that you're certain. And for some reason, what your soul telling you. If you know that this is the right answer, but you have to show me because I don't have the same mind as you. Like I'm not having the same thoughts as you. So I've got to be on that page with you.
And all the things you said, Kyla, that language is beautiful language because it invites people to get out of their comfort zone. You're inviting them. You're inviting them to try to explain something. And most of the time, when I was given the language when I was younger, earlier in my career, I was terrified. I was like, oh, I need to explain it? I don't know how to do that, right? So it was challenging.
Yeah.
But then it puts you out of your comfort zone and then it invites you to go and try to do that.
Yeah. Yes, it certainly does. And I love talking about boundaries too. It's my favorite word, but I think one of the keys to boundaries is that word no. When we're not setting boundaries, we're always saying no to something. If we're not saying no to our boss, we're saying no to ourselves.
Right.
It's always that practice of, okay, when are the appropriate times to say no? And when do you really need to go, okay, this is my job and I need to do it. Sometimes it's hard to find those lines and that just takes experience and practice and failure.
Right. And those boundaries, I know when it comes to all the things in your life, right? I mean, the whole Maslow's hierarchy, I mean, there's a lot of things we as humans need to take care of. Those boundaries are critical. Otherwise, we won't be able to care for our families and our own personal needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got connection, communication, and saying no. And what's number 3?
Yeah. The number 3 one, which is I leave it to the last, but I think it's actually a really critical one, is taking personal risk, Kyla. And what I mean by taking personal risk is it's that balance of exhibiting extreme ownership as a leader and at the same time learning how to delegate the right things. It's a very hard balance to get. And this is one where you really feel it when you make the mistakes. You really feel it, and you really feel the long-term repercussions when you make the mistakes. And this is the one, like the other two, I feel like I've been able to coach the people I've hired, but this one I felt like there's no really way to coach than really be there for people when they make the mistake and help them forward. But I go back to a company called Atruth. Many years ago, I was working there, and I was hired specifically to come in as a product leader, to come in and look at the team. And I was told by the hiring manager that the team's not performing well. They're slow in what they're doing. You need to fix it. Right? You need to come and make them move faster. And what I did when I came in there was I kind of observed for like a day or two, and then I immediately jumped to a conclusion. And I kind of said, these are all the things we're doing wrong. And here's where we're going to fix it. And I just went to my boss and said, we're going to fix all these things, and I'm going to tell the team that they're going to work on these things. And none of the engineers report to me. So, I was in a position of influence, but I went into a position of authority when I didn't have it. And immediately, every engineer looked at me and said, we don't want to work with you because you don't know anything about us. You don't know anything about our pain points. You have no empathy for why we came to where we are today and why we operate this way. And you're telling us to make all these changes. And I got really scared. And what I immediately did was I said, oh, I didn't want to do these things. My boss wanted me to do these things. And what I did there was, number one, I made a decision, but I quickly deflected it to the bosses. And I didn't take any personal risk. I basically shifted all the risk to the bosses. And it created a complex situation between the people who hired me and trusted me and the people who I was supposed to lead. And it took me over 6 months, Kyla, to recover from that. I had completely eroded trust. And everything I said, like, well, you told me your bosses said, but your bosses didn't say that. So is it you or is it the bosses? What's the truth here? And so I got really caught in, I would say it's a lie that I thought I had to do to protect my job, right? And you have to, again, this idea of this ownership mindset, you have to own the work you do. You have to, if somebody tells you to do something, or if you ask somebody else to do something, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this, right? Why is this important? If I own this company, own this team, why would I choose to do that? Sell yourself. And once you sell yourself, then you can buy, you have to convince the team. This is why I think the values of servant leadership are really important. The people on your team, they don't have to work for you. They can go work for somebody else. They can work for a different company. Why do they show up? Convince them why they show up. And you have to take that personal risk. And once they see you taking the personal risk, they really see you as a leader. They go like, I want to work for that person.
So in the story that you gave us in your situation, were you able to build that trust back?
Right. Yeah, it took me a lot of time, and it took me.
How did you do that? How did you manage to do that, especially coming in just so early in the game and having to really build those relationships? How did you manage to do that?
Yeah, I think I just hung in there for so long, and I left my ego at the door. And when they would be upset at me and say, like, "I don't trust you," and I would say, "I accept that. I accept my failure, and I accept why you don't trust me, and I'll try my best to." And I just kept saying that again and again. And at one point, they're like, "You're still here. You could go somewhere else, and it's clear to me that you have learned from your mistake. And it's clear to me that you want to do better." And I'm going to give you a chance. It took 6 months, and I had to work individually, Kyla, with each person. And I had to communicate. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. But you say 6 months, like that's a long time. I think that was really fast for that kind of a break and that kind of a rupture. That you obviously put a lot of effort into this. You went with each person, you said.
Right, and it's 6 months at a startup. Under 50 people. They always say 6 months at a startup sometimes feels like 6 years. So you spend so much time with every single person, and you spend so much time with them in the same space, right? You see them every day, and so yeah, it did take. I felt like, and it felt like a long time of, and it hurt the company too, Kyla. And I really appreciate my managers, my leaders, to not fire me. They're like, okay, this guy made a mistake. Let's help him learn. Let's help him give the space to learn. And they even when I blame them, they never blame me for doing that. So I appreciate their leadership qualities. And I think you talk about actually in your first podcast, and you kind of resonate into your entire leadership school, is look at the leaders who do well and learn from their qualities. Who do you want to be when you become a leader? And all these experiences they're all data points that I wrote down. Oh, James Lamberti did this. Suraj Patel did this. One day when I'm a leader, like a senior leader, I will do these things. And so I noted all those things, and I tried to improve at the areas where I was poor. Yeah.
Deliberately. I mean,
Deliberately.
I love that you took notes on this. You said, this is who I want to be, and I'm not going to just have this in my imagination. You wrote it down, and you are practicing them. You don't just say, "Oh yeah, I've got this figured out now." You're intentional about it.
Right, and you have to be, Kyla, because you can still learn 30 years into your career. There's so much change that's happening, and you have to, as a parent, I forget more things now than I did before I was a parent. So
I know, right?
I need to take notes because I'm going to forget, and I need to be organized about my own personal growth, because ultimately I have to be my own advocate. Right? I can hire mentors, I can work with others, but I have to be my own advocate, and I have to know the data so I can know what to fix.
Yeah. So I love, so as you're doing that, you're turning that around and leading other people in that way and sharing that with them and inspiring other people to really do that, particularly through your business, Nimi. Tell me about that, and tell me about how you're using that as a goal to really empower and inspire people.
Yeah, totally. I think if you look at that 15-year career I had in product management, the challenges that I faced were really global labor shortages, and that resulted in us hiring people to execute on products faster who looked the same. Right? We weren't doing a great job bringing diverse talent in. So I thought, why aren't we hiring people from Sri Lanka? And why aren't we hiring parents and women? And I thought a lot about my personal mission and what I want to do in life. And I wanted to impact people. I want to improve their lives. And I felt like this company would enable me to do that. I can touch each person and really help them grow individually. And that's why we founded Nimi, a company here based in the US and in Sri Lanka. I'm currently in Sri Lanka right now building out Nimi, hiring great, exceptional talent, hiring people who, when I talk to them, they go, I really want to do the best work in my life, but I don't know how to get there. I don't know what to learn to get there. And I just buy them a course. I just do it. And then I hear from them, this is the most awesome course I've done. And I've learned something new, and I can do better in my job. And it's so fulfilling for me, Kyla. It's so fulfilling that, I'm not right now I'm not touching 1,000, but I'm touching, 7 people, like, 6 or 7 people. I'm touching them individually. And it's so rewarding to me. And it makes me so happy in helping them
Wow.
doing the best work of their lives.
So Nimi, what is the business?
Right. So Nimi is a company that does a couple of different things. The main business is staff augmentation. So US companies that really need to grow very fast and they can't hire the right talent or the diverse talent that they need to grow. They can come to Nimi and Nimi can staff them with engineers in Sri Lanka on critical projects that they need to execute on in a short amount of time. And we commit to them really reliable talent. We commit and we give them flexibility. So when they want to grow up really fast or move people to different teams, Nimi can support them with that. I also provide these companies with product advisory in financial technology because that's the area of focus I've spent on the last five years. And so they appreciate that in what I can help guide their product strategy and product roadmaps. And then finally, Nimi is also a company that's in Sri Lanka growing talent. Like I said, training people, coaching them to do the best work of their lives, as well as building products for the Sri Lankan ecosystem. So financial products, technology products for Sri Lankan consumers.
So something at one point you said just now, you said engineers. And I don't know what happened, but as soon as you said the word engineers, all of a sudden I realized how much bias I actually have. Because when you said that, I had a picture in my mind of a white American man. And I had no idea that my mind was creating that. It's like everything, the culture that I grew up in, I guess, but that's still creating that image for me. But that is not the case. Engineers come in all shapes, sizes, colors, everything, languages,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
you're really working hard to change that image in my mind. You are hiring women and you're training them and bringing them up, and people from Sri Lanka. So Sri Lankans are not white, we're like, that's not
Right.
going to be that same image in my mind. And I cannot wait to have this conversation with you in a year where the image that comes to my mind next is going to be just somebody completely different. And I'm so excited about that. And I feel a little bit ashamed because that was the first picture, but also just grateful that I can acknowledge that that's what's coming up, but that
Right.
isn't always going to be the rest of my life,
Right. And so you'll find in Silicon Valley, actually, you'll find a lot of Indian engineers or engineers with Indian ethnicity or Chinese ethnicity or East Asian ethnicity. You'll find a lot of engineers, but there is still a predominant amount of engineers who are men. It just is, when people do think of like a lead engineer, they think of a man.
Yes.
Even in the US, and in the US, they've done some good progress in terms of diversity. If you come to Sri Lanka, Kyla, you'll find, even as I'm hiring, even as I'm talking to companies, and I say, I'm trying to build this company, they say, oh, you're going to have a hard time with women engineers. And I'm going, why? Well, they work and then they get married and they have kids. I'm like, so?
Yeah.
So what? So they can, even don't men have kids too? Well, what's going on here? So there's still a lot of bias to work against. And every conversation I enter it with a lot of passion. Every interview, when I interview people, even men and women, they talk about the user, they talk about in terms of he, and I correct them and say, the user could be a she too, right? And so I'm doing everything I can in every meeting, in every conversation to remind people that we are limiting ourselves. And that consensus of limiting ourselves becomes, community bias, right? We gotta work against that.
So let's flip just a little bit. Let's take a little bit different turn here, because when the way you're talking, it's so amazing how much effort and energy and work you're putting into this and passion. And I can see, we're on video right now, but this will be audio, but I can see in your face how much joy you're getting from this conversation and just from talking about doing this. But I'm wondering how you do that without being exhausted. So how are you maintaining life balance and taking care of yourself in the middle of all of this that you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, it can be mentally really exhausting, and it can be really lonely when you're working on these things. Like last night, I was up until 1 a.m. right? And now I'm up at 7 a.m. On this call, because there's so many things you want to do, and you want to do all of them because you're so excited about it. I'm writing a book and I'm building a business, and I'm talking to you about this podcast and sharing our thoughts and having a discussion about leadership, which I also love so much. I have to set those boundaries. I have to do them. And it goes back to saying no and setting clear boundaries and putting aside time, Kyla, to recharge. So yesterday, I went to the beach with my wife and my daughter for 2 hours. And I didn't take my phone. And I had thoughts. They came with me. I couldn't,
Of course.
I couldn't leave them behind. But there were several moments of just nothingness in my head, just like talking to my daughter about the way the waves move, and playing, imagining that this is a tsunami wave and running away from it. Like, we were just playing, we were just having fun. You have to do that. And sometimes you feel like, hey, everybody on my team is working so hard. Is it okay for me to take the time off? You have to, because if you don't, then they won't. You set an example of how you treat the things that are important for you. And if you don't treat your family and you don't treat your children well, and you don't take the time off you need for yourself, and actually that's the most important one, Kyla. I think a lot of leaders do a good job with their parents and their siblings and their family and their children, but they do a bad job with themselves. They don't give themselves time to just be and do something for themselves. It's really difficult to get that personal time, but you got to do it. You got to just schedule it in. My wife and I, we schedule it in. We just say like, hey, I'm going to go get on a call, because now I'm also away from my friends. So it's a call, once in 2 weeks for an hour. I just talk to my guy friends, my really close friends, and just talk to them about what's happening in my life, right? You got to make time for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you said schedule it. I keep saying the word I love because I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's just like my word, I guess, but it's my way of saying how much I appreciate and I'm grateful for. But I just the scheduling it, even if you're having this, if you are living by a schedule, especially as an entrepreneur who's go, move on to the next thing, build, you do have to incorporate that. And if that, yes, it might mean that those 2 hours, you're not going to be getting something done, but you certainly won't be getting anything done if you're so exhausted that you can't get out of bed.
Exactly. Yeah. Or if you're sick and I think people really had this moment, Kyla, when they get really sick. And when you get really sick, you learn how weak and fragile your body can be. And you realize like what is really important in life. It's going to be your legacy. It's going to be your family. It's going to be what you stand for. And those things are, you can't buy them with money, right? So then you have to really make those trade-offs. And something I want to touch on, Kyla, also about this idea of taking time for yourself. When you're a senior leader, you have the choice. Like you and I, right? When we're making these life choices, to like, well, you're working on this podcast, I'm writing this book. We're making those life choices early on in your career. You don't have that feeling that you can make those choices. Earlier on in your career, you feel like you need to work long hours and you need to make these choices, or you're not going to make it in through the career ladder. I'll give you a very specific example of how you can hurt your work-life balance, and it's often self-inflicted. When I was working at this company called Reputation.com in Redwood City in California, I was working really long hours because I enjoyed the work. I was really passionate about the work, and we were young, we were married, but both my wife and I, like, we are committed to our work, we were committed to our craft, so it was okay that we spent that kind of time. And then my wife, we got pregnant, and we were expecting a child. And when our daughter came, it was very clear at that moment. You plan for childbirth, but only when the child is born, you realize that the job really starts. And,
right, I know it.
Right, you know it, right? And you're like, okay, this lifestyle that I had before is just not going to work. I'm not going to be able to work weekends. I'm not going to be able to work late nights. I can't show up at home at 9. And, we had no family in the Bay Area, so there's no support system. So when my wife's maternity leave ran out, it was my job to take care of our daughter. It was clear, right? There was no she was not going to leave her job. She had a great job. She's going to go back to her job. And so for me, I self-inflicted that there's no way this job would work for me. I've trained everybody to take so many hours from me at my job that I wouldn't be able to tell them, no, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. And so I quit. I quit the job. At that time, it felt like that was the right thing to do. I felt like, I had to prioritize. I had to make a decision. And I did make a decision. I said no to the job. And then I became a full-time dad. And I stayed with my daughter until, she could go to daycare. But really what I did there is I made a decision without really thinking about, the constraints. I didn't talk to my boss and said, hey, I want to spend more time with my child. How can we make that work? Instead, I assumed my boss needs me to work 80 hours a week, and I can't do 80 hours a week and take care of my child. And so I'm going to go make this drastic decision. And a lot of people do that, Kyla. They do that. They self-inflict decisions on that. And this is an extreme case, but they make daily decisions and they make micro decisions on a daily basis that they don't really have to, but they feel they have to because of some societal pressure about how they expect it to behave.
Yeah. And I think some of that's, our own pressure of our own impression of who we think we are supposed to be for ourselves. We have this, yes, the society expects that of me, but also because we've culturally learned that, I expect that of myself. And if I'm not meeting these lofty, superhuman expectations, then I'm a complete failure.
Right.
And I was just talking to someone this week who she had experienced that, where she just said, well, what if I fail? What if I'm not going to be good enough? And I said, well, when will you be good enough?
Yeah.
When will the good enough level be reached?
Yeah.
And sometimes we can't really answer that question because we think that it's an impossible goal. But what would happen if you're already there? What would that mean if you were already at that you're good enough level just because you're you? That would totally change the way we interacted with our bosses, our jobs, our families.
Yeah, I think this imposter syndrome, whenever you take something new, the imposter syndrome, I had it last night, Kyla, to be honest with you. I was up late and I asked my wife, like, do you think I can do this? Like, am I good enough for this thing? Like, to do this work and, be a good dad and be a good partner and run this company and be a good employer? She's like, of course you can. Of course you can do it. And you have to, part of being a certain personality of like, I need to grow, I need to do more, I need to make an impact on this world, is that you push yourself, you push on yourself in the comfort zone. I actually don't know how I got here. I mean, I think I think the step one is when you have these pre-existing biases and you get to switch to another country and you get to reinvent yourself, you're able to start from a new plateau and then grow. And so I think that moments of reflection and reinvention enabled me to get here. And it also shows that anybody can lead. Anybody can get there, given the right environment and the right conditions. And you have to look back in the rearview mirror and say, how far have I come? And pat yourself on the back and say, hey, you've done great work. Everything ahead from you is gravy, right? Just enjoy it. That's what my wife told me last night. Just enjoy the process. You got to have fun. Enjoy the process. And don't be so hard on yourself. And
you're not the only one with those feelings. And I'm so glad you brought it up because most of our listeners are probably experiencing that. I've experienced that daily where I have to tell myself, and I talk about it almost daily with people in leadership. The more people I'm meeting in these higher levels, the more people who talk about it because they are all experiencing it. When you're trying something new, there's something that tells you, I'm going to fail at this because it's a little way of protecting you from failing, but it's not true. It's just lying to you. You are not going to fail this, and you are meant for this because you're the one doing it. Right. Well, I want to end on the question that I ask everybody, and it's, what does integrity mean to you in leadership? And I know we've really talked about it all, but I want to specifically say, what does integrity mean to you?
Yeah, I know this is a key point in your podcast. It's appeared in almost every episode.
Yep.
And it's integrity. When I think about my experiences, I have had to do things that people have kind of looked at me with an eye like, why are you doing that? Why are you behaving that way? And at that time, 5-6 years ago, I felt like this is the right way to lead. You lead with integrity. And I'll give you a very specific example. I was working at this company, and we had built this product, and one of our customers was just starting to use this product, and they were experiencing significant failures, and it just wasn't working, and they were struggling with it. And when we looked at it on our own, we could quickly identify, okay, here's why it failed. It's these three reasons, and we could even pinpoint the specific employees on my team who contribute to those failures. And there was an old way of dealing with that, which is like you just hammer people and say, "Hey, you couldn't do this. Like, how could you do this? Like, this is not the way you do work." And you kind of just beat people up and like get them to finish the work on time. And then you go to the customer and you say, like, yeah, it's this person and that person. It's their fault. And we'll make sure that we get them in line. We'll make sure. And I didn't do it that way. I immediately went to the customer and said, I take full responsibility for this failure. As a leader, it's my responsibility to guide my team. And we made a mistake. And we still don't know exactly why we made that mistake, but we kind of have some ideas why we did it. And we're willing to share with you what we're going to do about it and how we're going to make sure we don't make this mistake again next time. We really bring them into the process. And so having that was, for the first time when I did it, was scary because I thought, okay, am I giving people a reason to fire me? But it
Right?
feels that way.
It does.
It feels that way. You feel like, hey, I'm giving you all. But if you ever want to fire me, look at my Slacks, and there's a history of me owning up to mistakes.
Yep.
And but then some people look at me and go like, hey, that's kind of brave and bold of you to do that. The customer looks at me and goes like, thank you for saying that. Like, I think you're giving us insight into the challenges you're facing, and actually deepens our relationship. It deepens the trust that we have. And so I think it's a very simple example of integrity in the workplace, but being honest, being vulnerable to the people who work for you, the people who decide to work for you, choose to work for you, your customers who choose to work with you. That's so critical in the modern workplace, right? I think there's no place for this, arm-strong leadership and authoritarian leadership. I think it can be authoritative, but then you have to lead with humility and with integrity.
I don't think that's a simple example at all. I think that's a very powerful example because, yes, it does feel like I've had to do that so many times where I've just had to own those mistakes and accept it. And I actually have a 5-step formula of how to apologize. And you followed it in that example, but it really does deepen that relationship because the customer thinks, well, I don't want to go to somebody else who's going to make the same mistake and treat me worse afterwards. Right. I want to go to this person because I know that we can move forward in this. I mean, I guess at some point, if you're just making mistake after mistake after mistake, there's got to be a point where you're like, oh, but when you add that on of saying, this is how I'm going to prevent that in the future. And you show that integrity of, I'm going to make every effort to make sure that doesn't happen for you again. I'm working hard on your behalf. And that really does build a lot of trust. It's a beautiful example. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Dilip, this has been such an empowering conversation and just really an eye-opening conversation. I've really enjoyed every minute of it. And I am just so honored that you would spend this time. Thank you again so much for being here. And I hope that everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you so much for having me on here and given me the opportunity to have this great, energizing conversation. Like, this is one of the ways where I refill my batteries by talking to people and having these conversations that I love. So thank you for that. And please let me know how I can help you in any way, what I can do for you.
Oh, absolutely. And same goes the other way around. I love hearing about what you guys are doing. And I'm just really proud and honored to know you. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I truly mean it when I say that I'm honored that you would spend time listening to the things that I have to say. You can support me by subscribing to this podcast or by telling your friends, family, coworkers about it, and also by letting me know what you think. It really helps me to know what you like, what you don't like, things that you want to hear about, learn about, how I can share my expertise with you. I am here for you to serve you. Again, thank you so much for listening, and let me know how I can continue to support you being the awesome leader that you are.